Got to get his shoes on. So, do I need to get you guys Bibles too? You got them? You want picture Bibles? It's all right. It's all right. I want to tell you, of all the stories that are in the Bible, and that's what the Bible is. The Bible is just really a collection of stories about humankind's interaction with God. Humankind has been hearing from God and interacting with God for millennia, right? And we used to tell the stories to each other. Hey, listen, guess what God told me? And you're like, whoa, yeah, that's great. Well, then we wrote them down. And then we said, well, these ones are in and these ones are out. But ultimately, we ended up with this collection, this library of books, of scriptures, of readings, of stories. So of all the stories in Scripture, this is in my top 5 all-time painful stories. Now, painful stories, there's lots of them in the Bible. There's the Passion of our Lord, right? Holy Week, when he's scourged and tormented and beaten and ultimately killed and hanged. That's a pretty sad story. Of course, we have the resurrection, so that, the other end. But they have the widow of Zarephath. Anybody remember that one? Where Elijah comes and God says to Elijah, hey, go see the widow over there in Zarephath. She's going to give you some food. And he says, okay. And he goes over there and she's like, guess what? I don't have any food. And he says, you're supposed to give me some bread. She says, I don't. All I got is this little bit of flour in a jar, a little bit of oil. I'm going to make a little piece of bread, morsel of bread for my son, and we're going to eat it, and then we're going to die. Right? Yeah! I know. It's this sad, sad story. There's the slaughter of the innocents, and then there's this story of Hagar and Ishmael. It's such a sad story. So, Hagar, an Egyptian handmaiden or servant girl to Sarah. Sarah married to Abraham, right? So we have the characters, Sarah, Abraham, and Hagar. And Sarah is unable to have children, and Abraham has been promised children. Sarah has been promised children too, but she doesn't trust God at this time, and she says, sleep with Hagar and have a child, and that's how the promise will come through. And so they do, and Ishmael is born. But the promise is also for Sarah, not just for Abraham. And so God, we had this story last week. God says, listen, you're going to get pregnant. I'm telling you, Sarah. And she does. And she has a child, and that child is named Isaac. So we have Isaac and Ishmael, Ishmael being the older. Now, they're having this party in celebration of Isaac's weaning. And Ishmael is, as boys do, teasing his little stepbrother. So Sarah sees this and she gets mad. She says to Abraham, I won't have it. I will not have this. And send Ishmael and Hagar away. And Abraham's, this kills him, right? This is his child. But he does what she says. And so Hagar and Ishmael must go. And so he sends them out into the desert with a little bit of water, and they run out of water and soon are ready to die. And we get this dramatic and pitiful scene where this child will die of thirst. And she can't even stand to look at it. So much so that she takes the child and places it under a bush and walks a distance away because she can't stand to look on this. And who could? And of course, then God saves the day by providing the water. And in fact, goes on. The story goes on from there. But I want to stop there for a minute and ask, she's being put out of her family. What would it take for your family to turn their backs on you? Right? What would it take for your family to say, no more? You can't live with us anymore. You can't be with us anymore. We're not going to support you anymore. We're not going to talk to you anymore. You're out. What would it take? Or what would it take for you to put out someone in your family? What would they have to say or do that you would say, you're my boy, but out you go. You're my daughter, but you can't be here. You're not a part of our family anymore. Has that ever happened? We know the pain of separation and loss. We know it in our families. We've lost jobs. Many of us have lost churches. Many of us have left communities that were important to us. If you lost your job or you lost your health, or you lost your money, or you lost your house, if you were overcome with addiction or mental illness, how long would it be before your family cast you out? Well, they'd take care of you for a while, wouldn't they? But there'd come a point, probably, where they'd say, I can't do it anymore. Sorry. Enough is enough. Or, you're too much, is what they would say. Opioids. This is not a sermon about addiction, but I'm telling you, opioids are just killing us in this country. Right, doctor? I mean, it's amazing how easy it is to get heroin. It starts with painkillers, and you end up on heroin. Not everybody, I'm saying, but I'm saying that's how it happens. And it's an absolute crisis in the country. How many of those people started out as valedictorians in their class? Who went and had a job and maybe just lost that job. Or maybe they had an injury on their job and they got a prescription for 30 days of painkillers. Before long, they're addicted, and before long, they're homeless. How many of that? Those are good people. Believe me, life is neither easy nor pleasant for people who are cast off. They are alive, but are they human? Do we see them or treat them as human? So this week, I had a chance to serve in a soup kitchen. So our congregation, our vestry, we serve 4 times a year across the street at the Presbyterian Church, but there are those on the vestry who are asking the question, should we be thinking about doing more in terms of feeding the poor in our own community? So as a conversation around that, some of us gathered over in Gearing this week on Thursday, and we fed 95 people. We joined up with another church who has that night, 95 people, and then we had a conversation afterwards. And Brother Dowd, if you remember him, he preached here about a couple of months ago. He came out and talked to us about it. And the most powerful thing about that evening was not the handing out of the food, was it, Jan? The most powerful thing about that evening was the relationships that were started. My job was not to hand out the chicken, although I would have loved that because the chicken looked delicious. But my job was not to give the food. My job was to go around and talk to people. And I sat at a table and started a relationship with someone. I met a woman named Marcy. And she's new to town. She's only been here a couple of weeks. And Marcy is so full of life and spirit. I just loved her. But she's not traditional now. She's not somebody who comes in for a job interview. You're like, oh yeah, you're our best candidate ever. She had neck tattoos all around here. And I'm so dumb, I didn't know what they meant. I'm like, hey, why do you have a 308? That's my zip code. I don't know, some kind of a prison thing, I think, right? And she had spent some time in Hastings, and her hair was shaved. And she was just different. But I'm telling you, she's amazing. And somebody else came over to our table and said, hey, this is my friend, she needs some clothes. And I said, okay, I'll meet you tomorrow down at Potter's Wheel, and I'll buy you some clothes. It's not very expensive, they have tons of clothes. And so I did that. And Marcy says to me, she's at my table, she says, hey, I need some stuff too. I said, what do you need, Marcy? She said, I need a job. Do you have a job? I went, God, I wish I did. I don't. You could come clean our windows and pay $100 or something, but I don't have a job. She said, I need a job. So I said, Marcy, I can help you out one time. I said this literally in a text. I said, this is not an ATM situation. You can't come back next week and take another withdrawal, but I'll give you $100 if that'll help you. So I met her down at Potter's Wheel. I gave her a check for $100. And the thing is, she was just so full of life and spirit. I cannot wait for you to meet her. I hope she will come here someday. She is human. And she is holy. She did not fit the mold, but Marcy has not been forgotten by God. See, the thing about God is that God has other stories than the ones that we tell. I heard that this week. I thought it was so smart. God has other stories. God has other people that God's taken care of. Yeah? God had promised to Hagar and Ishmael something. God, in chapter 16 of Genesis, which, you know what? We never read in church. I don't know why, but it is never on the lectionary. But go home, look at chapter 16. God makes a promise to Hagar that Ishmael will have descendants. The same promise that Isaac gets. But we don't ever read that. parallels to our story. We have Sarah and we have Hagar, two matriarchs. We have two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Now, next week we're going to get the sacrifice of Isaac. The story nobody wants to hear. It's such a horrible story for parents, right? But today we get this parallel story, Ishmael being sent out to die. And the question is, will God renege on God's promise? And the answer is always and ever a resounding no. God will not renege on God's promise to Ishmael, to Hagar, to Sarah, to Abraham, to Isaac, to you, or to me. Now, here's my question. Does God have a plan for Marcy and for others just like Marcy? Does that plan involve us? Whose story are we called to hear this week, next week? Whose stories are we called to engage with, to be a part of? Who is not in this room today that you will meet or run across next week that you might otherwise overlook, that you might want to start a relationship with because God might be calling you into their story? Because if God hasn't given up on someone, how can we?